There isn't a zipper, there isn't an eye, there isn't a hem, there isn't a thing. All you do is
have to worry about
just like a sack. You put it over your head and pull it down and you're all ready to go.
I said, that's great for somebody little.
That's right.
But
I like it.
These
It is. It's
dresses,
beautiful.
they're a certain make, but they come large, medium, and small. So I said, I'll take a small, of course. And it fit me just like it fits me today. They didn't say a thing. Harland says, and Ida, you can have that. You ought to have that dress. It's hard.
Easy for me to say that. She's paying for it.
That's right.
So anyway, I took the dress and went home. And she was so anxious just to buy one there for you. But you need to try it on. But I said, well, I think you should buy a small, because look at this. See the waistline is a zipper. You know?
Elastic.
Expandable.
So, yeah, I think the whole thing is. It's nothing but knit, it's not even lined. So, anyway.
You better take Harlan shopping with you more often.
Oh, I love Harlan shopping. He looks at good things, and he goes in nice places, and we go in art stores. We look at all the art. It's got me really interested in art.
You better take her up where we took Barbara yesterday. She'd like that.
And Ida, how long did you play for the silent movies?
7 years, without a break. From the time I was 13.
Including Pro Boy and American Force. 7 years.
And then I played some in Salt Lake later than that. But steady.
And would you just watch the screen and you would just make the music up as you went
Yes.
along?
Most of it. You know, you couldn't play a piece, wouldn't fit. Yeah, but I could just improvise that stuff that you'd see it once, and then they run it a week. And they'd run it 3 times a day, matinee. No, only had 2 matinees a week in those days. Wednesday and Saturday. And then night, 2 shows.
2 shows every night of the week.
We we hadn't looked at it in the beginning. You see see it run through once. Then from there on, you were on your own.
So you played every night?
Every night but Sunday. We
So that's
had
10 times a week plus 2 matinees. 12, so 12 times a week you did the same thing. How long was a movie on an average? How long was that?
we'd run them a week.
But I mean, one movie, when it started at 7 o'clock, when would it be over?
An hour and a half.
About an hour and a half. That would be exciting, wouldn't it?
But then I remember Mr. King. Do you remember Mr. King and Farming and American Fork?
King.
King.
Oh, King.
Anyway, he used to
names
come to the
were different.
movies, and he always came the first night of the week. And he always sat on the front seat right next to where I was. So one night he came back, and we had the picture show that night of Mary Pickford Lost on the Desert and all. And of course it was, you could just really, she was just lost, and they couldn't find her way. And I tell you, you just creep along with it. And anyway, so the next night he came back and he said, well, Ida, he called me Ida. He said, I came back to see Mary Lost on the Desert again, because everybody knew these characters, Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and all that stuff. And he said, I came back because I wanted to hear you play that music.
And you didn't know what you'd play.
Oh, they're just, when they're sad, you're sad, and when they're glad, you're glad, and when they fall down, you bang to the act. Not a minute after they hit Charlie Chaplin, when he falls down the stairs, and when do you, and you know, you see him go, when do you?
Yeah, when does he hit the bottom?
When he hits the bottom. You can't be a strap. But that was easy. That was nothing. That was easy for me. That was one thing I could do.
Let me go sit in that.
No, let's just talk here just a little longer here.
Finish your story about how you finally were introduced to
Are you
Graham.
warm there?
But my husband, now I got to where
You were the first day in class and he walked in and you knew that he was the
I
one.
was just I said in my book, there is love at first sight, and I know for sure, and I do. I was so completely absorbed, and yet never bold, never looked anybody's way, you know. But anyway, I stayed with it a week, and I couldn't stand it. So Miss Swenson was the teacher, and I said, Mrs. Swenson, is this particular class have another section?
You mean you wanted to move out of the section where
You
Grant
bet your
was?
life, and I did. I didn't meet him, so I moved. He always came in with the crowd, and they went back and sat on the back, and I sat in that little front seat, just so mild and meek, you know. And he was just the opposite. When I think about it now, but it was also true. Anyway, I changed classes. Do you want me to tell this?
Yes. Yeah.
But my mouth half full of food. Excuse me. Guess I better swallow.
We'll give you time to do that.
Anyway, I changed classes. Then one day, I was standing talking as you come out of the library to a Mr. Hammond, and he was a boy from Idaho, a student. And I had met him before. So I was standing talking to him, and who should come out of the library but Grant? Well, I took my breath, and Hammond knew him, and so he introduced me to him, and he said, we were Mr. Clark, Miss Smith, you know, there was no familiarity in my day. Anyway, he said, he introduced me to him, and so I remember I thought Grant was a smart aleck a little bit, you know. He said, I said, well, Mr. Clark, where are you from? And do what he said? He didn't say Farmington. He says, oh, the smallest county in the state. Wasn't that smart aleck? And I don't think he meant to be, but that was just a common maybe answer. And I said if I'd had a $64,000 question answered correctly, I couldn't have been better. Because I said, well, that must be Davis County, and it was. I was on my way.
That's wonderful.
So then he said, he said, are you going to the library? And I said, yes. And he went in ahead of me. He said, well, I've got some books on the seat. I've got to go back and hand them in the library. And I said, well, I've got to study an hour. And so he said, well, you wait a minute, and I'll have mine in, and then I'll walk out with him. And he walked out to the front gate. And we stood there talking for a few minutes at 4 o'clock. And I'm in the show at 6:45, you know. And he said, what about a movie tonight? I couldn't say no. And I couldn't say yes. I said, please call me back at 6 o'clock, which he did. I went right home and I called Mr. Ashton, the show manager, and I said, I've got a real situation tonight, Mr. Is there somebody I might get to take my place for this one evening? He said, well, who do you suggest? And I said, well, Rose Durant plays for movies. I said, I don't know what she's playing right now, or she used to play down at the Lyric. That was down the street in Provo. And so he said, well, you take care of it. So I called Rose, and she says, yes, I'll play for you. So when Grant called, I was on my way again, as I say. And so we went, and so when he wanted to go to the Columbia Theater. I said, I don't want to go to Columbia. See, that's where I played. And I said, there's a good show down at the Lyric. I didn't even know what it was. That was a little dinky show house, you know. But anyway, we went.
That's smart, Alex.
And then on our way home, it was just nice. On the way home, we got talking, and I was a little bit, I don't think people have ever thought I was a bashful person, but I think I was a little timid. And so he said, I don't know if he said it or whether I said, you know, my father's a bishop. Thought that sounded kind of big. Do you know what he said to me? He said, my laws, what would he say if he knew you were out with a Catholic? That's exactly what he said to me. That was my first. I said the whole thing.
So did he soon tell you that was wrong?
Well, he didn't. I don't remember that I even pursued. I just was scared to death. Anyway, that's enough on that story. But it's the way it went.
What year was that?
19. Let's see, that was, he went on, I was married 19. That was 19. Let's see, we were married in 16. I'd been gone 5 years. So we were married then. That was in 1911, 10. What was it? 15, 16 we were married. 5 years after we met.
1911.
So it was 1911?
1911. That was a long time ago.
8 years before I was born.
But, you know. But it always, and then I always had to play in the shows. I couldn't go to the dances. I couldn't do anything. I always had to play in the shows. The only night I had off was Sunday.
Did you go home on Sundays? To American Fork?
No, not very often. Never did go back to American Fork very often. I was tied up. You know.
So you really never went home again? Then?
Oh, I went home.
I mean,
back
you
and
never
forth.
went home to live. You were, you always lived away from home after that.
Because I played all summer in the movies. And I lived in the hotel. That was where we had rooming houses, and we lived in people's extra rooms that they rented out, you know. Boarded across the street or something.
How'd you finally tell Grant that you played at the movie theater?
Well, I had to tell him. I had to tell him, and it was fine. He'd been there 1 year ahead of me, and he's kind of knew his way around, and I didn't.
So was it love at first sight for him too?
Well,
Or did you
I
go
went,
on
I
to
went
date
right, it
other
went
girls?
right on, and went right on, and went right on. Then he went on a mission the next October. He was in Australia 2.5 years. But and then they went by boat. And my letters would come by boat, either by San Francisco, wherever he was, because Australia was all one mission. Here's Sydney over here, and Perth down here, and Melbourne, and it was all one mission. So he'd be wherever he mailed that letter, come by way of London, or he'd come by way of San Francisco. Take a month. That's the truth. Different. Wasn't that all different?
Did you date others while he was gone on his mission?
Some, but I always played in the shows or was always tied up. You know. I wasn't very social. They couldn't say I was a very social being when I couldn't go to a school dance.
You weren't engaged when he went on his mission.
Oh no, oh no. And none of our letters were anything but just missionary letters, you know. But when he came home, I said the first time I ever went to a hairdresser in my life was the night he came home from his mission, and they had my hair done and my fingernails. And I had to.
Looked just right, huh?
Well, the best you can. Maybe not just right.
So then how long did it take before you...
Well, I'll tell you, I was engaged. We were engaged. Went on for. He went back to Rutgers to bank school. So he was away again. See, we were, and I did go with some kids. Some, naturally, you were in university. But anyway, but when we became engaged, and then another thing, I was always tied up after I quit the movies, and was working. I got a job. Then they gave me a job, being the official accompanist for the school. Now that was not salary, but it was enough to support me. So I gave up the movies. That's how I gave it up. Then I went from that on to the faculty, and then I had a studio. And so that was the way that was. But, so when Grant came home, he came right to Provo, and the night he got home from Provo, he calls me on the phone. And Harold, his brother, Harold R. Clark, the Y, he was his brother, and he went down, of course, immediately to see him and called me on the phone. Well, I'd gone out with Albert Southwick that night. And you know, Albert used to be director of the choir. He's quite a musician. But anyway, I had a date with him, and I went, and I didn't know Grant was home. When I get home, there's a telephone call from Mrs. Newell, the lady with whom I lived. And she said, there's a telephone call for you. Their number's such. She said, it's midnight. But I answered it, and it was Grant. And he said, I'm in Provo. His brother lived in Provo. He came down. And that's the first time I knew he'd arrived. And so he said, we talked a minute or two, and then he said, when may I come up? Well, proper like I was, I felt like I couldn't say, well, come up now, it's midnight. Because the boarders around there, Mrs. Newell, the landlady, I didn't know what it was all about. Anyway, I said, will you come up tomorrow at 2 o'clock? He always ribbed me about this. But anyway, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I was all ready, but here was old Stan Clark and one or two boarders who roomed there and boarded there. And they were just smarty, you know, and they knew he was coming. And so I just, you know, and they hung around. And well, anyway, I just waited, and finally the doorbell rang. I got myself, as I said, I went and got my hair done, my nails, first, only time. And the doorbell rang. Wow. And I didn't know where old Stan Clark might pop from. I just was so nervous. I wouldn't have been like that if I hadn't had those other boarders there. Anyway, it's Saturday, you see. So anyway, he came. Finally, the next doorbell was he. Well, I got along all right, pretty well with that. I was just, I don't know just how it happened. But anyway, I had a studio then at the Y. And so I suggested that we go walk over there. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we did. We walked over there. So I got rid of the boarders, and I got rid of all those kids at the boarding house. Stan Clark. And anyway, he's been a doctor in Provo all the years, but anyway, that's that. But now I've told you enough. You've heard that story, and if I told it over again, I'd have to tell it exactly the same, because that's the way it is. The way it was.
This is your life.
Was he keeping a pretty close tab on you?
Well,
I'd
I've been over at the Y for 4 years.
Yeah, I guess he'd...
So I was pretty well on my own, you know, and never depended on one. So I knew when I left American Fork, I knew very well I would never see 5 cents, only what I earned, because I had already those years of nothing but earn. I never had a nickel. And Father was the kind that said, well, hand it out to and him, stepmother. Well, I didn't say anything. But, you know, it was hard.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I've always wished that the girls had gone to the Y. I don't know why. The only reason I went is I could learn my lesson.
Excuse me, let's make this
But you've heard enough of my story, and I promise you, I'll never tell you again.
Oh, no, we love this story. We like these stories.
But when they're true,
When you went to the Y then, who was still at home? Was Leslie still there? And
but Leslie had gone to the Y the year before to prep school.
Mhm.
Before he's 1 year older than me. And he did go to prep school. And then he came the second year. And graduated from prep school. And that was his. But I've always been sorry that the other girls didn't break out, leave home, and go. Or I don't know why. Of course, I was in a position where I could earn it. Because there's lots of jobs besides paying in a picture show, aren't there?
But in those days, girls didn't work like they
No,
do
they
now.
didn't. No.
Did they?
Uh-uh. No, they didn't. The girls didn't work like that.
What did Mother do? Our mother, what did she do at this period of time?
oh, she was too busy being the scribe.
She
for
was the
Grandpa.
scribe for all the years, every Sunday, for grandfather's patriarchal blessings. Every Sunday she would go. Pleasant Grove to Lehigh, home. And I think of her devotion to that. She wrote such a beautiful hand, you know.
And how many years did she do that?
Well, quite a few.
Too
She got
many.
married and left. She may have even done it because they lived, Father built from a little 2-room place across over in the peach orchard on the south of where our house was. And they lived there, and I guess so she went off. That I was away, you see, all this time.
What's the address of that house in American Fork where you grew up?
But it didn't have an address when we
But
lived.
you know now?
The
No,
brick,
but I've been to see it.
the brick house. Isn't it
The
a brick?
brick, I've been to see it. Were you with me when I went to see it?
Marion went in it
Weren't
here
they
just a
with
few
you?
years
You
ago.
went, we went in.
We went
We
there.
went into the
Well,
house.
no, I wasn't with you when you went in. You went with some of Sarah's children.
Marion went in. on his
I
own.
went.
He's been in it.
Well, anyway, I went with
What street is it on?
Main Street. What's-
Main Street straight out.
Main Street and what east?
About 6th or 7th east. There were long blocks. Crossed the railroad track.
On the south side of the street?
North side of the street.
North
On the
side.
corner.
On the what?
Corner.
On the
North?
northwest corner.
On the northeast corner.
Northeast corner?
No, it's on the northwest corner of
No,
the
it was
street.
east.
Main Street comes like this. This is Main Street coming down here, and this is 6th East, and your house is right in this corner here.
That's exactly where it was. Then would you call that west?
Well, I'd call that the northwest corner, the intersection.
She's calling it. well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
that'd be
hadn't thought about it. But we came
The
in from
railroad
this
tracks
side.
came down here.
That's right. You know, when I used to play in
And we
the
used to live
shows-
over in that little house.